Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. In this video, we're going to be building the main fuselage of our FT retro rocket and also installing our wing and the optional landing gear. If you're ready to build along with me, let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. The first step that we're going to do with our retro rocket is to pop out all the pieces for our fuselage. Now, as you can see in this kit, there are a lot of pieces, but do not worry. This is probably one of the most fun fuselage builds you'll ever have. Let's go ahead and take our time, pop out the pieces, we'll identify them, and then we'll set aside the pieces that we don't need at the moment and mainly assemble the center section. Now that we have all of our pieces popped out, feel free to pause the video and make sure your pieces look just like what you see here. Our next step is to clear out the channels that are going to enable our A folds and our B folds. At that point, we can pause the video again, identify our components, and then we can start building. All right, our channels are removed. Let's go and identify each of our parts from our left to our right. First, we have the upper rear fuselage skin. We have the center upper fuselage skin. Up front here, we have our exhaust former. And these two formers that you see here are going to be used to not only give the fuselage form, but also to hold our EDF if we use that option. Down below, we have the beginning of our battery box. And right behind it, we have the continuation of our battery box. This big piece in the center that you see here will be the very first piece that we start on, and this is going to actually be our main ducts that we used, and we build the fuselage around it. In front, these three pieces here are going to be our nose assembly. We have the three main formers for our front nose. We have our rudder fin, our canopy pieces, and our lower hatch. These scraps that you see right here, I kept from our formers and our other various pieces because we're going to be doing lots of seaming and squeegeeing. These scraps are going to be really useful for you in the future, so go ahead and hold on to them. And the final piece of our little kit is this little dot that you see here in my hand. This is actually going to be the cap for the nose. Now that we've identified all of our pieces, let's go ahead and strip the table and just start with our center piece right here. Now to start the preparation for our piece, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to glue our seam together for our center section that you see here. This is going to give us the strength that we need to make this nice and flat and also very strong. I'm going to keep one of my squeegees handy, and the easiest way to do this is just to open it up at least 90 degrees and place a thin bead of glue, just enough to start squeegeeing out right on top. As we fold this together, you'll see that the glue squeezes out. We're just going to go ahead and wipe that down. Come back with your razor blade and just make sure that this little center section here where the front of the wing is going to install is not glued shut accidentally. I also like to kind of follow along the score cut here, and you'll see why in a second. We're going to let this center glue seam dry flat on our table, and while it's drying, we can remove the paper channels on both sides here, here, and on their outer portions here and here. To remove the paper, you can simply start peeling up, and if the paper doesn't want to follow the etch lines, all you need to do is follow it with your razor blade, just pushing through the facer paper ever so slightly. So if you have any problems with the paper coming up, you can simply drag the tip of your knife right through the paper. Don't go down too deep, because if you go too deep, it's not going to curve nicely. Typically our edge lines are plenty deep to be able to let it release nice and clean. I really enjoy this build because it's kind of a mix between my Master Series and also the typical builds that I design. We have a little bit of curve and a lot of straight lines, but when it's all done, it looks beautiful. This project could be a really great first step into the Master Series because a lot of the techniques cross directly over. While we're doing this, I mentioned before we want to cut this loose. I'm going to go ahead and peel off the foam and the paper from this outer section that you see right here. Be very careful, take your time. We're going to just carefully push this through. We don't want to rip that lower edge. There we go. This doesn't have to be perfect because it is going to be covered, but it does add some nice strategic strength. Frankly, probably the most difficult thing you'll do on the whole build. There we go. Apologize, I missed one of our channels here. There we go. You're going to notice that there's an A-fold shown on one side. An A-fold is where the side plate is above the bottom plate. To do a proper A-fold, we're going to keep the A portion firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate the body up 90 degrees. This enables us to push flat against the table and get a nice seam. So we've already practiced that. Let's go ahead and put a bead of glue right on the bottom of our side plate. I like to always start and stop about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. We're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate this up 90 degrees. There we go. Now that our side plate is up 90 degrees, this is going to be the main former that our ducks fold around on. To get the proper bend on our ducks, all we need to do is put our thumb and our forefingers around and just start gently curving it over. You're going to see that the foam is going to mold very nicely. And don't worry if it's not perfect, because we can always go back after this is glued together and form them even better. I'm going to do 1, 2. This one's easiest if we take it to the edge of the table. Just start getting its form. 3. Same process on the other side. Curve it up to 90. Curve it up to 90 again. There we go. And then finally we'll curve that up to 90. Now that we have all of our pieces kind of in a general form, let's go ahead and practice our first fit. To make the first half of our duck section, we're going to fold up this bottom piece here right over top of our former, and you're going to see that this lines up and tabs in beautifully, and the center of our duct is right on the center of our seam line. Don't worry too much about what's happening back here. The main goal that we want is we want to make sure that this piece lines up perfectly, flush on the front, and also lines up in the center. I'm going to put a bead of glue right on the bottom here, and then also right on the top right there. Let's go ahead and bring our piece up. We'll hold it in the center. And give this a good minute to minute and a half to fully dry. Now that we have our first piece done, we can kind of go back and we can mold this the way that we want. And what we're looking for is a nice 90-degree bend and a smooth radius. We should see that both top and lower surface are parallel to each other. As I mentioned before, we can kind of mold this in later on, but that looks fantastic. Let's do the same process now on the other side. I'm just going to turn this around and let the other pieces hang off the table so you can see a little bit easier what I'm doing. Do a quick test fit. We're happy with that. This is one of my favorite pieces to build on the whole entire plane because it instantly gives you all the form that you're looking for on those iconic ducks. Notice that I'm putting a little bead of glue right down the center. I'm going to push this in the center, and let it dry. Now this model will call for a little bit of patience here because we're going to want the glue to fully dry before we move on to the next step. So if you find yourself in previous builds where you can kind of jump ahead, recognize that all these pieces are under a little bit of tension and you want to let it cure. Give it at least a minute to a minute and a half between each step. Now that the front of our ducks are formed, let's go ahead and form the rear of our ducks. Just as we practiced before, we're going to fold this over 90 degrees and you're going to see as we push this together and we line up the tabs that they're going to seam together beautifully. Now this is going to require you to push down and actually in just a little bit to get everything aligned. Once you've practiced this move, we're going to open this up, put a seam of glue right where it's going to taper in and all along the edge. Here's our bead of glue and another bead of glue. Same process as before. We're going to fold it down. And just a little bit of pressure inwards. We're just lining up the edge of that tab right there. I'm going to hold this for about a minute to a minute and a half, let it fully dry, and do the same process on the other side, but add an additional bead of glue down the middle. All right, same process on the next side here. We're just going to kind of tab this in and hold it in place. There we go. Once we're happy with that, same process as before. We have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. We're going to place a bead of glue right along the edge where our ducks meet, and then also one extra bead of glue right down the middle. Now I'm just kind of holding these angles to favor the camera to get the best view possible, but this is incredibly easy to do when you're putting it together. Here we go. And notice I'm just concentrating on getting everything lined up and I'm holding it in place. I'm not putting any direct pressure, grabbing anything hard. Everything's just kind of holding in place while the glue dries. The better you align the center section, the better your whole fuselage is going to build because everything tabs into this. This is where maybe this is a little bit different than the Master Series because we're making a key box in the center that everything is going to build off of. Our next step is to fold over our little tiny piece of paper here just to give us a little extra reinforcement of where our wing is going to go into. If there's any kind of glue globs in here, just clean it off with a razor blade and then we can use a scrap piece of foam to be able to smooth this out as we glue it down. I have no little glue globs anymore. I'm just going to place a healthy bead of glue right on the edge. Take my scrap piece of foam and smear it down. Our center section of our fuselage is now done. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the front battery box and the inner battery box. We're going to go ahead and assemble our front and our middle battery box here. You're going to notice that the middle battery box has an A fold and the outer battery box has a B fold. This is all done for strength purposes. Let's go ahead and start with the inner battery box. An A fold is where we keep the side plate against the table and we rotate the bottom plate up 90 degrees. I'm just going to test this on both sides. Side plate against table, rotate up 90 degrees. There's no foam in the middle. We can go ahead and glue that down. Glue goes on the very bottom of the side plate. We're going to press it against the table and rotate it up 90. If you have difficulty rotating things up 90 degrees and you want this to be perfect, in our crafty kit we have a couple triangle squares which are really beneficial. All right, same process on the other side. We've already test fit it. We'll hold that up 90. And the inner battery box is done. Now for our B fold with our front battery box, our side plates are going to be beside the bottom or the top plate. And to do a proper B fold, we're going to keep the bottom or top plate firmly against the table, and we're going to rotate the side plate up 90 degrees. Check that side, and check that side. We're going to apply the glue on the side of the bottom of the top plate, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the center, and then we're going to rotate it up. Notice that I'm pushing a little bit of pressure against the table. That gives us that nice crisp 90-degree angle. Same process on the other side. Bead of glue against the side of the bottom or top plate. We're going to rotate it up 90 degrees and hold it into place. You may notice here these two optional slots. If you're going to be building a prop version of our retro rocket, you can purchase an extra battery strap and be able to put this in. Honestly, a simple piece of Velcro and the lightweight 2200 is really going to hold just fine, but if you plan on doing some really extreme aerobatics or customizing it, I wanted to drop that in just so you have a little extra reinforcement. Now our inner and our middle battery box are built. Let's go ahead and install the middle one first, and then we'll do the outer one second. We always like to test fit any pieces we do, and you're going to see very quickly how nicely everything tabs together. We want to just do a quick test fit. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees. We're going to line in our tabs, and we're going to press it down. What you should see is the very edge of the battery box just slightly protrudes out our center firewall, and that inside, our battery box tabs in and it meets up firmly against the tops of our ducts. Now the retro rocket is designed to give airflow through all the different pieces here. We wanted to keep this cavity open, so whether you have the two 2200 3-cell series together for a 6-cell in the center, or you have a single 2200 milliamp up in the front for the prop version, all of it gets plenty of airflow and draws that heat away. Now that we're happy with the way everything looks, we're going to apply a bead of glue right on the very top, just like you see here. And we're going to press it down into place. We're going to use the table as our friend. We're going to hold this down firmly and align it just like you see here. I'm just going to grab one of my pieces of scrap foam here and just kind of hold everything together. This isn't really necessary if you don't want to. I'm going to put a bead of glue just favoring right on the edge here. And I'm going to squeegee it right down, and you're going to see it pushes it right over top, joining those two pieces together. There we go. Next, we're going to do a quick test fit of our front battery box. We're going to just line up the tabs. We're going to make sure that the top is flush, and then ultimately, this is going to expose our slot that's going to hold 3 thicknesses of a foam for a former. Take note of where everything touches, and then we can come back with a bead of glue. Place it right down on the top here. Gonna leave that notch open. Don't need to put any glue on the actual tabs because those are just meant for alignment. And then we're gonna press that down into place. Once we have this done, you can use the table as our friend here. We can hold this upside down, press it firmly against the table, and let it dry. All right, our battery box is on. Let's go ahead and move on now to our formers. Here you see our 3 main formers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold these 180 degrees and glue them together. You don't need to put a lot of glue for this. This is really just to kind of hold the shape of the airplane and keep everything aligned. Little wiggle. Whenever I'm putting my beads of glue down, I always keep it about a 1/4 inch in from the edge, and that way there's plenty of room for it to squeegee. Easy way to kind of dissipate the glue is when you're pushing it down, just give it a little bit of a wiggle, let it thin out. The thinner and more even the glue is, the stronger it's going to be, which means you don't need a lot of glue to get a lot of strength. It doesn't matter which one of the formers we pick, but next we're going to go ahead and we're going to install this 3rd doubler on one of them. All we want to do is make sure the center hold lines up, the outer perimeter lines up, and the bottom between the 2 notches line up. Easiest way to make sure we don't put glue where we want it is to put the glue on the smaller piece. Then we can line this and press it down. Again, just a little bit of wiggle. Thin that glue out and press it in place. Now that we have our formers glued together, let's go ahead and start with the very front one. This front 3 thickness former is going to tab right over this front slot and then press down in. If you you have any difficulty seating it in, you can always pinch the tab in the middle down just a little bit to give it a little bit of taper and let it set in there. You want to make sure that the formers are firmly up against the very bottom of the top surface of our ducts. Once we're happy with the way everything's formed, I'm going to place a healthy bead of glue right down the middle of the former on both sides and just a little bit on the tabs. Just flip this around so you can see a little bit easier here. Make sure your former is perpendicular to the top surface of your duct. We're going to let this fully dry and then we'll move on to the second former. And just like before, we're going to do a quick test fit. Like I said, if anything's a little tight, you can always kind of squeegee down the two tabs, and we're going to press this in place. Now this former is also going to do us a favor. This back section's under a little bit of pressure. You can always press this down, and you're going to see that when we do so, it's going to straighten out that back section very nicely. So we don't want it to rotate back like this and be perpendicular to the rear portion of the duct. We want it to be perpendicular to the front portion of the duct. Glue right down the center on both sides, don't need a lot. Line it up and press it in. While this rear former is drying, it's always easiest to kind of hold your hand underneath the duct and press up from the bottom against the former. This is going to make sure that the rear of the duct is flat up against the former and you don't have any kind of crown shape. And as you can see, when it's fully dried, both these pieces are parallel to each other and they're perpendicular to the center of the section of the duct. So now is a really great opportunity to kind of go through and to make sure that everything is formed the way we like it. By now, once we've gotten everything squared up with the ducts, the battery boxes, you're going to notice that these outer ducts are nice and parallel. So this is perpendicular to the top surface and the bottom surface, and we have this nice radius. If you need to do any kind of adjustment, all you simply need to do is put your finger right in between and kind of press against your thumb and your middle finger, and it'll give you all the form that you need. This is the exact same process on the Monster. The only difference is the Monster is going to be a lot easier to form because it's much bigger parts with a much bigger radius. Now for one of my favorite steps, we're going to put the rear upper skin on the back of our fuselage. So this is the rear upper skin of the rear portion of our fuselage here, and you're going to see that this center section is going to be the main section we want to bend. On this outer edge here, we have two etch lines, and these etch lines are meant to be cut or scored just below the facing paper. Oftentimes our laser master Jason can do this for us, but I always like to just get a nice crisp edge by going down and just barely cutting through. You don't want to cut too deep because if you do, it's going to want to seam there. There we go. Now we can carefully remove our paper. Don't worry if it kind of comes off spotchy. To do the bend over a longer surface, you don't want to use your fingers and start crinkling it in midair because that's going to cause it to dent and wrinkle. Easiest way is to take it to the edge of the table and to slowly drag and press down, slowly but surely, a little bit at a time. Keep in mind the center section of this is going to easily crease on you and you don't want that to happen. So I'm just kind of working towards the edges. We just want to take a lot of the pressure off the formers so they don't have to hold the bend, but they really just kind of secure it. Our good friend John Overstreet, who designs all of our Master Series, has done a really great job in doing tutorials and educating people on how to bend foam and getting amazing shapes out of it. If you guys haven't checked out some of his builds, I would definitely recommend you do so. You're going to notice these longer tabs in the front, and I'm really excited about this feature because this gives us the ability to actually pull the skin down into the former underneath the ducts. First thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and test fit it. To do our test fit, we're going to slide the edge of our ducts right into this notch on the inside like you see here. Our next step is to line up our tabs. There's one in the rear and one in the front. And then finally, we can line up our longer tabs just like you see here. You're going to see for our test fit, as I put a little bit of gentle pressure here, I can kind of slide this up and over our former very slightly and then pull it down. Our goal is to get the skin as close as possible to the center former. We can easily just get a little bit of forward pressure on the back of our former. And as we pull this down, you're going to see it lines up perfectly. Now this is the exact process that we're going to do with securing our upper wing skin. The nice part is we don't have to completely remove it, put glue, and squeegee it down. All we simply need to do is push up on these tabs about 1/4 of an inch. And now we can apply a bead of glue just inside of where our skins are going to be and on the top portion of our main former. You don't want to get any of the glue on your forward former because that's going to be where our middle section skin is going to go. All right, I'm going to rotate my little stand back here. We don't have to put a ton of glue down. I'm going to put one on the front skin, one on the side of the other side of the skin, and I don't need to get the whole entire piece. I'm just going to go ahead and do the back 2/3, just like you see here. We don't need to panic, we have plenty of time. I'm just gonna line up this little center notch right over the notch of our formers, and then I'm gonna reach down on both sides and pull it in. So you can see I'm just pulling that in, give it a nice even pressure on both sides. One thing I like to do is just hold with my thumb the little center notch right over the center notch of my former. I'm not pushing this down and denting anything, I'm just making sure that it's lined up evenly. Now that our rear upper skin is fastened to our ductwork, let's go ahead and give the rear form of our tail its form by gluing together and installing our rear former. You're going to notice that when we fold this over 180 degrees, that there's actually 2 different depths that we have in our ring. This is to actually give us the ability to mount our outer tail cone, but also our optional thrust vectoring prop unit or our motor mount. When we put our glue on to glue this together, let's put the glue on the former with the biggest hole, and that way we don't accidentally put any glue where we don't want it. Little wiggle, press it flat against the table and we'll let it dry. Now one thing that's the same as what we see on all of our Master Series and many of our other builds is we have these little centering notches that you'll see on your formers and also your skins. These little notches really help you identify where the center section is, so when you line them up, your plane will automatically jig itself straight and true. So you can see we have a little tiny notch at the very back here, so when we do our test fit, with the outer circle and this 2 layers facing outwards, we can simply slide this up into place and line it up. Just like that. We're going to glue this former in 2 steps. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do the main curve. Secondly, we're going to come along the straights where there's paper on both sides and we're going to glue that down. We already did our test fit. I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of glue right over the top. Notice I'm not going all the way down to the 90. I'm going to kind of hold this away. When you do this, you can obviously face it towards you. I'm going to slide this up into place. I'm just letting the outer surface of the former kind of squeegee over. I'm just putting pressure on the 2. One nice thing about setting the glue temperature down lower is you can see that the glue is not too hot. You can use a piece of scrap foam or even your finger. Just make sure you don't burn yourself. There we go. All my energy is just making sure that this outer skin is just shingled right on top of this rear edge and that our 2 notches line up perfectly. I'm going to give this a good minute to dry to make sure none of it opens up or shifts on us, and then we can glue down each side. Now that our former is dried on the top 2/3 of the curve here, we can put a bead of glue on each side and we can press these down into place. I'm just going to do this from the back here. It'll be a little bit easier. There's 1 And here's 2. Many times I hold this at an angle to enable you guys to see as clearly as possible. Whenever you're doing this, just make sure you have the best view possible for you. There we go. Again, as I'm holding this down, I'm not putting too much direct pressure with the tips of my fingers. Everything is very soft, very spread across. And notice that the paper is just outside of that rear fuselage skin. We let this go and you can see how nicely everything is shaping up. Our next formula that we're going to install is going to be the formula that holds the top half of our EDF if we choose that option, but it also gives us the form that we need for our upper and middle fuselage skin. To prepare this upper former, we're going to take the formula that looks like a donut and we're going to fold this in half. Make sure if you're going to be doing the EDF conversion that you do not lose this piece. Now fold that in half. And just to save a step later, I'm going to go ahead and do the same treatment on this piece here, and then we're going to put it someplace safe so when we put the power on it, we have it. We just did a cut through in the center section here, and that's just to make this a little bit easier to crack in half without it creasing. Again, you see we have a center notch right in the middle here. This center notch will be able to be referenced on our upper fin slots that we have right here. There's not really an internal notch that you can line up with, but it does tell you where the center is, and you can easily line up in between these 2 slots. We're going to carefully press this down into place and give it a quick test fit. And the amount of pressure that we push downwards with will be how tight we get it against this upper wing skin. And as you can see, we can kind of sight right over this notch and look at the slot on the upper part of the skin to make sure it's lined up evenly. And also a great indication of it being even is that these 2 portions here are equal. All right, now that we've practiced our fit, I'm going to put a bead of glue on the whole entire edge and then repeat the same motion I just did. All right, I'm just going to kind of rotate that in. Not too worried about where I smeared that glue. And again, as I'm pushing down in here, notice that I'm kind of using my thumb and my finger here to hold in on the former as I push straight in. None of these pieces are being forced at all. Everything should naturally just slide in and fit really well. Our last step in the rear portion of our fuselage here is to glue the outer skins of the ducts to the rear portion of our fuselage. Now, on the Monster series, there's going to be a bigger gap than this just going flush to each other. There's going to actually be included a little doubler former that you'll fold over in the same way you did here, and that piece will insert and glue inside of it. When we do our test fit, we should be able to see that when we push this in, that the lower portion that's going to saddle against the wing is going to line up nice and flush, and that this edge here is just going to get a little bit tighter and it's going to be under pressure and pull that skin out. Once you're happy with that, I like to apply a bead of glue from the inside just so it's nice and neat. And we'll do this one side at a time. Notice that I'm putting my thumb and my 4 fingers right at the top where it's the tightest, and I can kind of move that back and forth to get the perfect fit. We're going to hold this for at least a minute to a minute and a half and let it fully dry because this piece is under pressure. One side's done, same process on the other side. Just a thin bead of glue right inside that seam. We're going to press down with our thumb and forefinger. My main focus is just making sure that this is all flat against each other and that this bottom surface is flush. All right, you can see the fuselage is taking form very quickly. Our next step here is we're going to put this aside and we're going to start working on the main portion of our nose section. And for this portion, you're going to want to have some blue painter's masking tape that is low tack. You don't want anything too sticky or it could peel and damage the facing paper. Let's go ahead and get our front formers for our nose and we'll get started. Now that the main rear portion of our fuselage is done, we're going to put our attention towards the nose section. For that reason, I went ahead and brought the 3 pieces of our nose section out, but I also brought the center upper section of our top fuselage skin. This is going to be especially important when we're sizing the nose and putting it into place. Let's go ahead and first address these 2 main nose pieces here. The largest one is going to be the piece that goes up against the former. The second one's going to be the one that mounts it, and as you can see, there's a score cut in between it to allow it to be able to kit. Let's apply a bead of glue to both of these to allow them to glue nice and flat. And just like we did on our ducks, we're going to go ahead and glue these seams here right down the middle. We'll close it, and then take a scrap piece of foam and squeegee off any excess. Do this on both our large nose piece and then the second piece that's just inside of it. Give this about a minute to dry, and then we're going to come back and we're going to remove the paper from the nose pieces that we need, and also the middle fuselage skin. For our nose pieces, we're going to be removing three main sections. It's going to be these center sections. We're going to skip these flat panels, and then we're going to remove thin slivers of paper here, here, and here. So we'll do the center sections on all three. It's common for our facing paper to not come off in one clean pull. We've actually been working harder to increase the bond. I'd rather have people coming back and having to kind of pull more and more pieces off than the facing paper remove easily. And while we're removing our facing paper, let's go ahead and remove the facing paper from the middle upper fuselage skin as well. We can put our two smaller nose pieces aside for the moment, and let's take a look at this large nose piece first. This is going to be the piece that we're going to glue together and prepare before we assemble it on the fuselage. All our other pieces are going to mount directly to this piece once it's on our fuse. You're going to notice two folds here, and this is going to make up our battery hatch. This is going to give us a nice clean way to join our battery hatch and also provide a ton of strength to our nose. This piece is going to be an A-fold, which means we're going to have to use a table as our friend to be able to get that properly. Once we practiced our A-fold, we're going to focus the majority of our glue again on the bottom of the side plate, take it down to the table, and fold up 90 degrees. Let's do the same process on the other side here. I'll face this one away from me, 90 degrees. And there we go. Now that we have our two A-folds done, let's put our attention towards the center section of our nose. We can do this a couple different ways. We can use the table as our friend, just like we did before, and slowly kind of just drag this through, giving it its form. And because this piece is so much bigger, I'll do this a couple times just to kind of get the form established, and then I can kind of come back with my thumb and my forefingers and curl it just like this. This is a really simple way to do it, especially when you don't have too wide of a piece that you're bending. If you get much wider than this, you want to stay on the table so you don't accidentally wrinkle it. As I mentioned before, it's really important with every one of these pieces that we're not forcing the glue to hold it in a position, we're just fastening it into position. So the better we can make this not fight us, the better the piece is going to look. Same process down below here. I'm just going to take my thumb and my forefingers, and I'm just going to curl these in, giving it a nice gentle radius. The A-fold that we did on that piece is going to give a lot of strength right here and enable us to mold it. There's that. And one more on this side. You can see I'm just using the squishy parts of the sides of my finger to kind of hold it and give it its form. I'm not making any single move trying to get its full deflection. I'm just doing a little bit at a time and letting the foam slowly find its way. One of my favorite things about working with foam board is just how many unique shapes you can make and how easy it is to do so, but you don't want to do it aggressively. You can now see that as we bring this together, it's very easy for us to be able to shingle both these pieces without fighting it too much. That's exactly what we want. For this next step here, I'm going to go ahead and do this reverse, but go ahead and feel free to allow this face towards you. We're going to glue this seam together, and we're also going to want to use the table as our friend to be able to get this nice and flat. All we need to do is apply the bead of glue right here. I'm going to shingle them on top of each other. I'm going to make sure I line up as perfect as possible. And what I want to do is I want to give this about maybe 15 seconds to 30 seconds here to start drying up really well. Once we get this where it's tacked up really well, we can then take it to our table. We can hold it against the flats of the table. And if we have to make any adjustments, we can do that really easily. We just don't want to accidentally glue it down to the table. Now, a really cool trick is you can take packing tape, line the table with the packing tape, and then you won't accidentally glue it to the table. And when you pull it up, it'll release real easy. You're going to notice I have a little bead of glue here. While I'm holding this down, I can easily squeegee that off and spread it out. There's a lot of strength that's associated with this piece right here, so take your time and let it fully dry. I actually didn't put enough glue in this seam, so I'll show you how to fix it. We're just going to push a little bit more glue in here. And now, I use the table as my friend, but in an opposite direction. There we go. All right, to give this a little bit extra strength here, you're gonna see a score cut. I'm just gonna bend this up ever so slightly, and what that's gonna do is it's gonna make this piece really rigid. If you have to do any extra tape or extra glue swipes and smear it over similar to what we did with the wing, feel free to go ahead and do so. But just keep in mind, once we put this on the fuselage, everything is gonna glue solid to it, and it's gonna get its strength. Now that we have our main nose section done, let's go ahead and do a quick test fit here into our main fuselage. Now as we slide this into the nose, these two outer folds here that make up our battery box are actually going to go to the outside of our main battery box. It's also going to be really important that we have an offset about the thickness of the foam to allow for the battery hatch to come up and seat against the bottom of the battery box. Let's go ahead and start our test fit here. We can just simply grab this on. I'm going to get it started just like you see here. I'm going to do this reverse to me here, but as I slide this down, you're going to see that these two tabs go right in between, and as I press it into place, I can easily lift up and set this right on top of the former. Now we put a lot of work into this piece, and I'm really proud of it because you're going to see that the bottom of the nose is going to stop against the ducts. The top of the nose is going to line up perfectly with one layer of the former. And if these two pieces at the end of the day are going to actually fold in and pull everything nice and tight. Now one thing that's really important that we want to keep in mind is when we put this former down, we don't want this too wide or too narrow. We want it nice and straight. So this is a really good way to kind of gauge to make sure that everything is going to fit properly. The perfect amount of flex would be where the undercut of the foam lines up perfectly with the paper, and there's a slight shingling action going on to give you a nice clean seam. So I always just kind of like to hold this up. That looks good there. Oh, that's fantastic. Perfect. All right, now our final angle to check is going to be down below. You're going to notice now with our main nose pieces, the A-folds give us a nice shelf to be able to have the battery hatch sit on. That's going to make a really nice feature, and it's also going to make it really strong as well too. Once we're happy with the fit, we've checked our center section. To fasten down the nose, we're first going to place a bead of glue inside the two wings of the inserts that go inside of our ducts. At that point, we can take our hands, we can roll it around, and we can fold it hard up against the foam, and we're going to hold it for about 1.5 minutes. This is going to cinch it in just a little bit closer and lock everything in place. All right, so our first glue joint here, we're going to just put a bead of glue down one side and down the other side. And we're gonna fold this in and hold it down. I kind of like pressing this towards my body a little bit because then I can kind of use my fingers and hold it in. Hold it for a good minute to a minute and a half to let it fully dry. Our glue is dry. That's our first joint that we've glued. You can now see everything's so lined up so well that our two seams line up perfectly. We're gonna give this bottom of the wing extra strength by putting a bead of glue down in here and pressing these two together. Just a nice healthy bead of glue, going about 1/4 of an inch in. And I'm gonna press this in. Now the only main difference you're gonna see between this model and the Monster model is because the thickness of the foam stays the same, but yet the model gets bigger, I have a doubler that's gonna go in here to give us both extra strength and make up for the difference. Our lower portion of the nose is now glued and it is much stronger. Let's go and put our attention to one final piece, and that's gonna be the notch on the battery hatch. You're gonna notice that both these inserts are about the width of a piece of foam, and that's exactly what we want. If you need to make any kind of adjustments, you can push up or down on the tabs to be able to move it up or down. But if you follow along with my build steps, they should be really, really close, if not perfect. To glue these in, we don't have to put a lot of glue in. I'm actually just gonna take a scrap piece of foam. I'm gonna push this in just a little bit. And I'm just gonna put a drop of glue right there. Pull that out. Again, I'm gonna make this line parallel. I'm gonna hold it until it dries. Same process on the other side. I'm just gonna use this scrap piece of foam here to kind of open up this channel. That gives me the ability to get my nozzle in here and just put a little drop of glue. Then we'll move it. One of the biggest things we wanted to do with designing this model is we wanted to make sure there's plenty of room for all the electronics, for the different kind of batteries and configurations, and plenty of airflow going through it. We also wanted to be as light and minimal as possible. That's why all these pieces intersect with each other to make it incredibly strong, but also very minimalistic. So at this point now, we can go ahead and prepare our top piece. And you can see that our notches all line up right with the middle. And we've already tested this out to make sure everything shingles together nicely, both on the middle and also on the sides. Let's go ahead and form the top piece of our fuselage skin, and then we'll go ahead and install it. I'm just gonna use my thumb and my forefingers, give us a very delicate round. Keep in mind, anytime these tabs or notches are in there, it's gonna crease easier, so you don't need to put as much pressure in those areas. Let's see, we can kind of use the table as our friend to roll this around, and we can really mimic the shape without even having to put it on. You notice I didn't put any real glue here or on the back, and that's because when I glue this piece down, the glue that's holding on the formers will go ahead and adhere it to the rear skin and also the front skin too. So we don't have to glue those separately. So we'll slide our long tabs in. I like to go all the way down on the one side and just gently press it into place. And as I work it over, there we go. This is one of the most rewarding pieces because everything just pops directly into place. Couple things to point out here. You're going to notice that these two tabs for the canopy and the center hole is going to be facing towards the rear of the fuselage. You don't want to turn this around. The center hole is actually for a future option. This will enable people to either build this with a stock foam board canopy or to have an FPV canopy as well. Now that we're happy with the way everything fits, I'm just going to pop up one side here with our long tabs. We'll just lift this up. There's a healthy bead of glue right on my edges. And now, just like before, we can work this down on both sides. Then we can reach inside and just simply pull it down. Our next section for the front nose is going to look a lot like our original here, but you're going to notice that we don't have those A-folds on there. So just like before, we're going to go ahead and start establishing a nice curve. All foam board has a grain to it, so in some angles it bends a lot easier than other angles. When you start getting to more of these angles here, you're going to notice that the foam is a little bit more rigid and it kind of needs a little bit of help. This is where you can use the table or even something like a marker or a pen to be able to give you a little bit harder of a crease. There we go. And that's going to meet up nice and even. Now for this, a lot of times if you guys have built Master Series, the habit may be to kind of push this together and then stick it on. We're gonna go ahead and do it just a little bit different. This is just my personal preference. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and line up our center section and we're gonna do one half at a time and then bring it down to the middle. The easiest way for me to do this is to take our blue masking tape here. And I like to favor whatever side I'm not working on, and I'll put my tape just on the side of that notch. I'll shingle it over using the undercut, and then I'll tape it down hard. This gives us kind of a good starting point to be able to establish our lines and glue this down. Now when we glue this down, we're not going to really put a lot of attention on this portion here, but what we're going to do is we're going to adjust where the flat of the nose goes, and we're going to move it up and down to make a shingle on the curved portion properly. So you can see by me moving this up and down, I can either make a shingle on top or I can push this down and make it go underneath. I want to go ahead and just lay it just where it goes, right over top the whole way down. And that looks really good. I can focus my glue on the straight and also the curved portion. This may seem a little counterintuitive at this point, but I'm going to let the glue rest for about 15 seconds here to start drying and tacking up. Now I can come down and I can repeat the exact same process I just did. I'm just going to start shingling it down. There we go. There's so many different ways and techniques you can use, and if you built a lot of our Flite Test planes in your own planes, feel free to use your own. This technique works really, really well for me because I'm only working on a small section of the nose at one time. The most important thing is that you line up the center notch with each other before doing this step. We're going to give this a good minute to a minute and a half to let it fully dry, and then we can do the other side. All right, we're gonna do the same process now on the other side. Make sure that your one side is completely dry, because if it's not and you pull this tape, it's gonna go the other way. There we go. And we always do a test fit here just to practice our move. Again, you can see I'm kind of coming down, land a shingle. And there, that's perfect. It's gonna be hard, but kind of hard to show you, but I'm gonna get my glue gun. I'm gonna again favor the glue just on this inner lip. And I'm placing a healthy bead of glue. I'll show you in just a second as I let the glue rest. There we go. Perfect. Give it about 15 seconds, take a deep breath, calm your nerves, and then we can focus on seaming it around. Like I said, this is just kind of my opinion here, but oftentimes when the glue is really hot and you try to immediately push it down, what may happen is you're kind of thinning out the glue as it's trying to dry and you weaken the whole joint. Give it about 15 seconds, knowing that you've already made that move with your hands to be able to line it up. Gives the glue the time to kind of become a sticky mass, a sticky, bead, for lack of better words. And when you push it down, it immediately grabs it and it holds it a lot better. It also takes less time to be able to hold this, so we're gonna give this a good minute, minute and a half. But typically, this could easily spring apart and you have to put tape all over it. All right, so our two final sections are on the very bottom here, and we're gonna be joining these together. We're gonna do the exact same process. I'm just gonna put a little bead of glue right here on the bottom. We're gonna do one side and then the other. So again, we're gonna do our practice fit. That looks real nice, and notice when I hold this down here, it pushes right up against that bottom of that battery box. I'm gonna kind of get my nozzle and use gravity as my friend here. Put a little bead of glue right on the bottom. And then right on the bottom of that battery box. Just give it a moment to rest. Then we'll fold it down. If you have any glue squeeze out in that little bottom corner, it'd be a good time to squeegee that out with a scrap piece of foam just to make sure our hatch can fully seat down in there. And finally, we're going to do the same process as before, but this time we're going to be putting a bead of glue right down the center. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue right on my battery tray, down inside of it, and right down the center. And we're going to let it rest. And then we can hold it in place and let it dry. Once our glue is fully dried, we're going to go ahead and cut the relief for our fold over, and that's going to be between these two little dots, here and here and here and here. All we simply need to do is just cut straight down, straight down. We can now go ahead and peel up this piece and peel off the extra foam. This is going to be a fold over for extra strength. So put a healthy bead of glue right down over top of your battery hatch. We're going to take the same piece we just pulled off. We're going to go down for about 15 seconds. Then we're going to fold over and squeegee out the glue. This gives us a very nice battery hatch that is wide open and incredibly strong. All right, we have two pieces of the nose down, one more to go. We're going to do the same process as before. Now with the smaller nose piece here, it's going to be harder to turn than most of your other ones. So I'm going to use most of the table as my friend. And then also in these slivers here, you may find that you want to kind of go down either with something sharp like your triangle square, a barbecue skewer, and kind of give it a little bit of help to get that full crease. Being able to bend it with a table isn't going to always give you enough just because of the angle. So it's easier just to kind of put this down and then fold it up, rotate it, and you can see it makes a nice angle. I always kind of start in the middle and then fan it out on all sides. There we go. We always like to do a test practice piece, and this piece will probably need to bevel just a little bit because when we roll this in, these pieces of foam are going to kind of collide and press it out. So I'm just going to take a very, very small little sliver out with my razor blade. I'm not even going down to the facing paper on the other side. I'm just doing a little 45-degree bevel all along this upper curved area. One more time. Line up our little dash. And as you can see, when I kind of push up on it, it holds into place beautifully. Now that we're happy with the way everything fits, we're gonna do the same process as we did on the second nose piece. I'm just gonna put a piece of tape going vertical right on the one side of the dash line so I can still line it up nice. I'm gonna shingle it right over the top using the undercut from the laser. And I'm gonna press it into place. I'll do my best to hold this to your advantage. And that looks wonderful. Beautiful, I'm happy with that. Open this up like a door hinge. Again, my heat gun is not on high temperature. It's actually set down pretty darn low, one notch below medium. See, I'm putting a nice healthy bead. I'm gonna let it rest for a minute. Now, if you built lots of Master Series or are used to forming foam, there's so many different techniques that give you the same results. This is just the one that works for me. All right, I'll hold this down. You can see I can manipulate it, move it up, down, any direction I need. But once I'm happy, I'm gonna hold it there. We're gonna give this about a minute to a minute and a half to fully dry, and we'll do the same process now on the other side. And just like before, we're gonna fold this over, shingle it down, That looks fantastic. I'm gonna give it about 15 seconds or so just to rest a little bit, start tacking up. I'm just kind of moving it around, make sure it doesn't melt, and kind of move over to the side. And now I can go right down, press it into place. I'm just gonna lift that up just a little bit. There we go. And notice anytime I'm touching the foam again, we're not using any direct pressure with our fingertips. We're just using soft hands, the fatty parts of our fingers, the fatty parts of our hands, just to kind of guide the foam. If you have to force it with your fingertips, you're pressing too hard and you should be forming your piece a little bit more before putting it on. We got both sides down. We're gonna go ahead and work on the bottom now. Same process as the second piece. One side down, let it dry, glue the other side down, and don't forget the glue in the middle seam. All right, healthy bead of glue. All right, one final section here. I'm gonna put a little bead of glue on the bottom half and use my nozzle to drape the glue right down the center seam. There we go. Just gonna use gravity as my friend, let that kind of fall into that cavity there. All right, let's press that down. There we go. All right, friends. Our main nose is now done. There's one last piece, and frankly, I think it's one of the most rewarding ones. That's this little tiny dot in my hand. And don't worry, if you accidentally lost this piece because it's so tiny, just cut it out of a piece of scrap foam. It's just a simple rectangle with a curve on the top. I'm gonna peel the back piece of foam here. Always like to do kind of a little test fit. That's gonna be good. Gonna put a little drop of glue right down in the middle there. Now on the Monster Series, this hole is a little bit bigger, and you could actually put a little tiny FPV camera all the way up in the front. Just keep in mind, those cameras get really hot, so you're gonna wanna make sure you vent it somehow, whether it's through the bottom battery case or some other way. There we go. Just gonna trim off any excess I may have. Just get the perfect fit. All right, so the nose of our retro rocket's now done. We are ready to move on to our next step, which is gonna be our canopy and our rudder. So for the canopy, we're gonna have the 4 pieces that you see right here. You can first start by peeling off the facing paper off of one side of each of these pieces. All of these pieces of the canopy are gonna glue together the same way that we did our nose. But first, I'm gonna go ahead and curl these pieces, and I'm gonna start with the rear of the canopy first. I'm gonna establish my piece right in the middle of the canopy, and I'm gonna work down from one side. Now the back of the canopy is actually gonna glue together, so we don't really need to put a lot of curve there. We really need that just to kind of fold in half. So I'm putting all my attention from the middle of the back to the front. You can see now when we bring these back pieces together, the curve of the canopy is automatically going to start taking place. The important thing with the back canopy is to start it off right. We want to make sure these back pieces line up perfectly on the bottom and that the little hash mark in the center is right at the very top center position. My first bead of glue is actually going to be to glue this back center together. That's going to kind of help us. Same process as before, we're going to let the glue rest for about 15-20 seconds, get good and tacky, and then we'll bring those pieces together. All right, you can see I'm just taking my time, kind of smearing that glue thin in and out, making sure my notch is at the very top in the middle, and my bottom lines up perfectly. Doesn't hurt to use the table as your friend in this process just to make sure that everything is sitting nice and flat. We're going to hold this for a good minute and then we'll start on our next piece, which is going to be the rectangle with the 2 tabs. Next we're going to go ahead and prep our middle piece here. It's so thin I could just use my thumb and my forefingers to give it a nice gentle curl all the way around. Taking my time to make sure that when I put this together, that the curve is really close to exactly what I need, so I'm not fighting it. Just gonna do a quick test fit. Again, we're shingling over the one side to the other, and that looks wonderful. I always like to put my glue on the piece that's gonna be underneath and shingle over top of. Again, I'm putting a nice healthy bead of glue, about 1/8 of an inch wide. We're gonna let it rest. I really hope that if you guys enjoy building the retro rocket, that you'll really consider a lot of the other great Master Series that our good friend John Overstreet's designed. You can go from a classic World War II airplane all the way to an F-18 jet. You can see I'm not fighting anything at all. Just placing it in. This piece is symmetrical, so no matter which side you get or which way you rotate, whether this part is the leading edge or the trailing edge, it's gonna work. All right, one side down. Now I can easily just take this other side. We'll just confirm the fit. That looks wonderful. I can lift it up. Gonna place a nice healthy bead of glue right on that lower shingle. Second piece of the canopy is done. Same process on the third one. We're just going to use our thumb and forefingers, give it its shape. If you're having any problems with fitting the foam together, it may just be because you need to bevel the bottom edge of the canopy. All right. I like this, but I'm just going to use a piece of tape on the one side, just like we did on the nose, just to help me along. There we go. All right, same process on the other side. Just gonna do a quick test fit. That's perfect. While this is drying, you can see where my temperature is here. I just keep adjusting a little bit lower on things like this. I'm actually at that second notch, just maybe a touch below. Okay, cool. Now our last piece honestly is going to be the most difficult one because this has a pretty steep curve to it, and we're also going to need to bevel the back edge here. Let's go ahead and form it first. We'll do a test fit and then we'll bevel as needed. I'm going to kind of put my thumb right in the middle here because that doesn't need to curve as much. We're going to curve that right around. Beautiful. And as we mentioned before, I'm just going to cut a really slight bevel. One nice thing about these open canopies, if you need to go on the back side and do any kind of reinforcement beads and squeegee them with a scrap piece of foam, you can do that. On this piece, I'm also going to use a piece of tape to help me. All right, let's fold this down, and that's fantastic. Like I said, at any point, if you have to kind of come back here and put a reinforcement bead of hot glue, you can take a scrap piece of foam, paint it in there. That'll give you plenty of strength. We're gonna let this dry for about another minute here. We'll do the exact same process on the other side, and then we're ready to fit the canopy onto our retro rocket. Now, one thing I'd really love to see from our community, and possibly we'll be able to do this in the future, is design a 3D FPV canopy, much like what you see on many of the other airplanes. Now, this could be simply to hold the camera, or this could be a pilot point of view cockpit. I definitely think, especially with the Monster retro rocket, this will be something that'll be a blast to revisit. All right, same process on the other side now. We're just gonna do a quick test fit, kind of pull that piece to the bottom. That is the last of my glue stick. We're gonna let that dry, and then we're ready to fit the canopy onto the retro rocket. So you can see on the fuselage of the retro rocket here, we have these two tabs and we have this open cavity. As I mentioned before, this is kind of the future-proof to design if we want to do anything from LED lights, FPV equipment. Even if you want to 3D print one of these and make it removable, you'll be able to pass your electronics down through it. All we simply need to do a quick test fit is line up the one tab, line up the second tab, and with a little bit of pressure down, it should fit nice and clean. And that looks amazing. A good way to know you have your canopy where you need it is you should see the seam of the canopy line up almost directly over top of the seam of the fuselage. You're also going to notice the center notches, and you'll be able to line up the tail of this right with the center of the notch for the rudder. If you need to do any kind of trimming to be able to make the canopy fit better, this would be the time to do it. Maybe a little bit of bevel cut, maybe removing some glue globs on the bottom. You want this to be a nice flush fit on the very bottom. Now that we're happy with the fit, I'm gonna grab a hot glue stick out of my drawer. Same process as before here. I'm gonna place a nice healthy bead of glue, and I'm gonna let it rest. Now the only different thing is when I press this in, I'm gonna squeeze a little bit more to have it maybe favor the inner diameter, and then I'm gonna let it expand out. And the reason is I don't wanna smear the glue all over the place. There we go. Now in our decal kit, we do have a Canopy decal. It's really easy to be able to add on, whether it's before or after. I actually like to add on after I've glued it onto the retro rocket. All right, I'm just gonna give this a little bit more squeeze than we need. I'm gonna tab one side in, tab the back side, get everything centered up. And with nice even pressure, I'm just gonna press this down. Now don't worry if you have some slight gaps on different parts of the retro rocket. We're gonna dial down the temperature of our glue gun even one step lower to make it a little bit thicker, and then we're gonna trace a lot of these seams at our very last step, from the rudder to the canopy to the ducts, to give it a beautiful radius. So when you paint it or finish it off with decals, everything is gonna be seamed together and you'll never see any of those gaps. With our canopy glued on, we can now bring in our rudder. Now if we built our canopy nice and square, this is actually gonna help reinforce our rudder to keep it perpendicular. Let's go ahead and just do a quick test fit here. That fits beautifully, and you can see it just kisses the very edge. If for some reason your canopy wandered forwards or backwards, don't worry, you can always slide this a little bit forward or a little bit backward to make it meet. But a perfect fit should give you where the back of the rudder meets perfectly with the back of the fuselage, and the front of the rudder meets perfectly with the canopy. Now to make sure that our rudder is perpendicular to the bottom surface of our wing and also the fuselage, we can use this tall triangle square that we have right here. These are actually included in our crafty kit. We can go right to the back of the table, and you can see that we can hold this up and it's gonna line it up perfectly. Now that we're happy with the way everything fits, let's go ahead and glue it on. I'm gonna first start with a bead of glue, let it kind of drip down the back of the canopy, make it nice and thick. Bead of glue on the bottom of the rudder. And once this is all dry, we're gonna come back and we're gonna radius a bead of glue on all the sides of our pieces. Here we go, we'll just tap that in. 1, 2, 3, slide it forward a little bit. I'm gonna take my triangle square and I'm gonna hold this up just like you see here. Now we're not gonna rush this part. We're gonna give this a good minute to minute and a half to fully dry, and then we can come back with our glue and we can radius off all of our pieces here to make a beautiful tight seam. On my FT300 here, I'm just one notch and a little bit below here, and that's gonna make a really nice steady seam of glue. All I need to do is just like a caulk gun, just go right down the edges. You can see it's not bubbling or anything. I can even lick my finger and come back and then press it in. I'm gonna go along with my ducts and my rear of my rudder here. I'm gonna seam this together, make it nice and strong, and also give it a nice radius. All right, the fuselage of our retro rocket is now done, but as you can see, we have a big hole here. This is where our battery hatch goes, and it's also the piece that's gonna hold our optional landing gear. Let's go ahead and build our battery hatch, we'll get it installed, and then we can move on to mounting our wings. The piece that I have right here is gonna be our battery hatch. You're gonna see that we first start off with a C-fold, but we're gonna actually put a little bit of a bend upwards to match the angle of the front of our fuselage so it can tab in. For that reason, I don't want to fight this when I'm gluing it together. So all I'm gonna do is put a slight crease on both sides, just like you see here. That way I can easily open this up 180 degrees, I can get the angle I want, and then I can glue it down. So we're gonna practice our C-fold, and the easiest way to make sure we have a good C-fold is you're gonna see these little tiny marks that are gonna protrude through. This is the open space for our optional landing gear. All we need to do is make sure we line this up and glue it down and hold it into place. So you can see that we have it lined up. All our tabs are lined up perfectly. We can just open this up. I'm only gonna put glue on a section here and here, but I'm not gonna put it on the front tabs quite yet. Give a little bit of a squish, move it around. Even use the table as our friend just to make sure everything lines up perfectly. and we'll hold it in place. And again, you can see that I'm holding this out just so we can angle this up. So for this next piece here, we want this angle to match the bottom of our nose. Noah came up with a really cool solution here. We're just gonna line this up right over the seam, and you can see that as we push this in here, this is gonna match up nicely with the angle of the middle piece of our nose. All right, all I need to do now that we test fit it, I'm gonna open this up. I'm gonna put a bead of glue inside each of these score cuts because I want it to be nice and strong. And I'm also gonna put a bead of glue on this back rectangle. Now we can kind of fold this forward. We'll go right back to the piece here. And we'll make sure that angle matches. Now that we have that angle match, I'm just gonna hold this down, let it fully dry, and our hatch is just about done. Now before we do our test fit, we don't want to push our piece in and not be able to get it out. So for that reason, I'm gonna just take a simple piece of packing tape. I'm gonna fold over about 1/2 of an inch here. And I'm gonna take that folded over 1/2 of an inch, I'm gonna stick it right on the very back. I'm gonna fold this over, stick it down. I can later cut out the excess for our landing gear. And that gives us a really great pull tab to be able to remove our hatch. We're gonna do a quick test fit here. All we need to do is line this up, press it all the way forward, and with a little bit of pressure down, it'll pop right into place. Now you can see, this is not going anywhere. If your hatch is loose for any reason, you can always put a couple drops of glue on the very top here, and that's gonna be able to help that kind of pop into place and rest on the top piece of foam. But this was specifically designed to have a really nice friction fit, and I'm yet to have one fall off. With our hatch complete, we're ready to mount the wings, and the first thing we need to do is assemble and glue together our wing hold down mount. For that, I'm gonna be using our Zap adhesive. I love the medium thickness or the thick thickness for this step. The piece that I'm holding right here is gonna contain all the pieces we need for our wing hold down, and also it has the firewall mount for our prop version of the retro rocket. Along with that, you should see the 2 screws that you see right here. The first thing we wanna do is pop out all the pieces for our wing hold down. We'll test fit them, and then we'll glue them together. Now this is a structural piece here that is really important, and we want this to be strong. In the past, on less structural plywood pieces, I've used hot glue. We definitely don't want to do that on this step because the speed and the forces this wing's going to hold. I'm going to be using the medium Zap adhesive and also our kicker to be able to glue this all together. Both these glues are available in our store if you don't have them. So I'm just going to do a quick test fit. You're going to notice that this piece lines up directly over the holes and that these tabs protrude out. Each one of these sides are going to press on, and that's going to tab forward, and that area right there is going to be the area that hinges underneath the bottom of our rear former. Once we're happy with the way everything fits, we can go ahead and remove it. And the first piece I'm going to start on is going to be gluing these 2 doublers together. Test fitting your pieces first is really important because that gives you the ability to make sure that you have the orientation right and that everything's going to fit properly. I'll slide this down. All I'm doing is putting my attention towards matching up both the holes and getting all my edges parallel. There we go. Now this is already drying, but you can also give it a quick spritz of kicker, and that's going to give you the ability to rapidly dry it so it's ready for the next step. Next, let's glue on the 2 sides. Let's do a quick test fit. Our wing mount's now done. We're ready to move on to installing it into the fuselage. On the rear of your fuselage, you're going to notice that there's about an 1/8 inch gap on both sides right below the former. This is going to be right where our piece is going to slide in and slide forward. All we need to do is slide the wing mount down, and I'm just going to rotate the wing mount to make sure that the bottom of the wood is flush with the bottom of where the surface of the wing is going to meet. This piece does not have to go all the way back and be flush with the very back. You may see a tiny little gap there, and that's just fine. Once we're happy with how everything fits, I'm going to place a healthy bead of glue right on the bottom of our former. That's going to be the majority of our strength. And then I'm just going to put a big old smidge of glue on both sides here and then press it in place. Same motion as we just did here. I'm going to go from the back forward, slide that forward, and then rotate it to make sure that the surface of the wood is flush with the bottom surface of the fuselage. Feel free to go back if you need to put any extra glue you may want just to reinforce this area. So for this next step here, I'm going to stand up. We want to do a quick test fit to make sure everything lines up. And to test fit our wing, we're going to go ahead and press the front of our wing in. And as we push forward, you're going to notice that the center seam of the wing lines up perfectly with the center seam of the fuselage. I'm going to push this all the way forward. And what we should see at the very back is that the center seam lines up right over our tab, and also the trailing edge is flush with the rear of our former. If it's a couple millimeters inside or outside, don't worry at all about that. That's totally normal. You're also going to see that when we press this down, there's such a great precision fit that all this area is nice and tight. Now that we're happy with how everything is centered, I'm just going to make sure one final time that our notch in the very back, our notch on the rear former, and our seam is lined up in the middle. There we go. And there we go. This is going to be a little hard to show you on the camera, but you'll be able to open up the wing just slightly and you'll be able to see where the hole passes down through the wing. You can also take an extra piece of pushrod wire and you can go ahead and pass it through the exhaust port, but what we want to do is we want to be able to poke a hole through the wing where the two holes are going to be. Take your time, line it up, and if you press through and it doesn't go all the way through, or maybe you miss the mark, just go ahead and move it until you press through and then mark that hole. So I'm just going to go ahead and sight down it. This is kind of the angle that you'd probably be expecting to have as well too. Everything's lined up and centered. You can take a straight pin, anything you want. There we go. There's one. And an easy little trick here is if we know where one is, we put a little plywood piece on there, and there's a good likelihood we'll hit number two. Now that we have our two marks done, we can line this up. I always like to just do one last check here and make sure everything's passing through. 1, 2, and now we can glue it down. Now I can place a healthy bead of glue about 1/4 inch from the edge. We'll pick it up, line it to the two holes, and hold it into place. It's always nice just kind of go back and make sure that there's no issues there. We're gonna let this fully dry, give it about a minute, and then we can take our screws and a Phillips head screwdriver and screw it in to see how it fits. All right, our doubler is dry here. I'm just gonna go ahead and start the screws on both sides. And there we go. While we have our wings and our main fuselage built, let's go ahead and put this aside and start preparing our pieces for our optional landing gear. A huge shout out to our dear friend and team member, Dave Jester. Dave designed these puck inserts and also these adapters that are going to be a new feature on so many of the airplanes that we design in the future and even revisited from the past. These landing gear inserts simply glue inside of the wings, and these different pucks allow you to remove the landing gear easily, and they're also incredibly strong. This landing gear kit's going to include your 3 inserts, your 3 main pucks, 3 of your wheels, and 3 wheel collars, and your landing gear. The only tools you're going to need for this is going to be a ruler or a triangle square, and also some heavy duty pliers. We're going to go ahead and glue our inserts in this moment, but first let's go ahead and assemble and prepare our 3 main landing gear pieces. The first piece we want to go ahead and assemble is going to be our nose gear. To do our nose gear, if you flip over the puck on the back, you're going to see that it can favor the left or the right and pass through. It's up to you completely on which side you want to do for the nose gear. The first piece that we're going to bend is going to be the main support on the very top. That main support is going to be about 2 centimeters long. Notice I'm using some really heavy duty blunt nose pliers. I'm going to go ahead and bend this a little bit past 90 and then back. This gives us a nice sharp angle. We want it to end up at 90 degrees, almost there. Maybe just a little bit more. There we go. And as we pass this on through, you're gonna see that it's gonna go down all the way and then seat nice and flush. If you can't push this flat up against the table, make sure that your bend isn't too wide. Our next step is to measure down for the nose gear 4 centimeters. So I'm gonna just hold my triangle square right here. I'm gonna go down 4 centimeters, which is right there. I'm gonna grip it with my blunt nose pliers, and now I'm gonna bend it 90 degrees towards this other hole. So I'm just gonna go ahead and center up, make sure I'm bending perpendicular. We can always adjust it later. Do a nice sharp bend, again, a little bit more than I need, and then back it down. An easy way to be able to tell and make sure that your nose gear isn't going to turn to the left or the right is just to kind of sight down it. And if God forbid you have any issues, you can give it a little bit of a tweak. If you have to put too much pressure on it, make sure that you push this out, grab it with the pliers, and twist it that way. That's actually perfect. Once we're happy with our bend, we can slide on our wheel, check for fit, perfect. Slide on our wheel collar, and then tighten down the wheel collar. Once we're happy with how everything rolls, there's no restrictions, I'm just gonna put this hard up against the collar and cut it. Now there's one last step here in our landing gear, and that's to lift this up. We're gonna lay down a bead of our medium thickness zap, and then we're gonna press it down into place. And this is where I like to have a little bit of a kicker, just to lock it in. All right, 1 landing gear down. We're gonna do the exact same process, but the only difference is on the rear landing gears, instead of being 4 centimeters, they're only gonna be 3 centimeters. This is gonna give us a proper angle of attack that we need to make the airplane take off easily. So again, we're gonna measure right around 2 centimeters, maybe just a little bit less. We're gonna grip it, sharp 90 down, get that angle as tight as possible. With our rear landing gears, we want to make sure that we're opposing sides. In other words, we want to see the wheel on the outside and the landing gear on the inside. So make sure that you make a left and a right. Next, we're going to measure 3 centimeters down. We'll grip it with our blunt nose pliers. Again, we're going to make sure that our wire bend, our first bend, is perpendicular. We're gonna bend it towards the other hole. Again, I like to get it nice and sharp and bend it back just a little bit. It's nice and perpendicular. Next, we'll slide on the wheel and the wheel collar, and we'll tighten it down. Once we're happy with everything, we can lift this up, take our medium or thick zap adhesive, we'll place a nice bead of glue right down into it, and we'll fasten it down. All right, this would be our right wheel. Let's go ahead and make our left one. Final piece, just under 2 centimeters. And this is the one that I want to make sure I make a left and a right. There we go. So we have a left and a right piece, that's perfect. 3 centimeters from the very bottom. Grip it. Check for perpendicular. Bend it. There we go. That's perfect. And last piece, let's lock it down with some zap medium and kicker. So before we glue the inserts in, I'm going to show you how this works. In the very front here, there's a notch. And behind that, there's 2 clasps. To install our landing gear, all we need to do is press the front notch in, and it locks it in on the back. Anytime we want to remove it, we just spread open the 2 wings on the back, and we can pull it out. Again, this is something we're so excited to introduce in 2024. We're going to be doing many new designs in 24, probably more than we've ever done before, but also we're going to revisit some of our classic designs from the past with the same solution. This means many of our iconic warbirds are now going to have a set of landing gear that's both strong and removable. Now that we have our landing gear assembled, let's go ahead and put it onto the airplane. First, I'm going to go ahead and start with our hatch, and all we simply need to do is cut out the sections in between these dots and remove that piece. From that point on, we can go ahead and put our insert in, glue it in, and install our landing gear. The most important thing when we glue our inserts in is we want to make sure that the tabs are facing towards the rear of the airplane, no matter where we mount it. So in this case here, we're going to have our very front, we have our tabs to the back. You just do a quick test fit, make sure we're happy with how everything looks. That looks wonderful. And I'm actually just going to go right on the top here and put a bead of glue down in. There we go. Now we can take our longest landing gear and we can snap it into place. Next, we're going to go ahead and do the same process that we did on our battery hatch on the 2 portions of the wing that you see here and here. Now be careful not to cut too deep through the thickness of the foam because there are servo wires that are going to run through there and you do have a slight chance that you could possibly cut one. Also, the spar is right underneath this puck right here, which is going to give us both strength and rigidity, but we don't want to cut and weaken that spar. So we're only going to go down the thickness of the foam and remove these 2 squares. You're welcome to remove the wing if you want to. I'm just going to leave the wing on for this step. There we are. Again, we're going to make sure the two release flanges are pointing towards the very back, and we'll just do a quick test fit. I'm going to go ahead and just favor the glue on the sides of my panel on 3 of the sides, and I can also go back and put a couple drops right on the spar if I wish. There we go. Scrap squeegee, wipe off any excess we may have. Nice thing about this landing gear option is this can be added anytime that we want. Let's go ahead and do the final piece, same process, and then we'll fasten our landing gear. There we go. Quick test fit. Make sure our release tabs are facing towards the back, and they are. And we'll glue it down. Again, we can take a scrap piece of foam, remove any extra glue that we don't want to see. Now this is a personal preference. It doesn't really matter either way, but I always like to see the kind of wheels facing towards the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and snap this one on my right side. Whoop. This one on my left. And then finally we can reinstall our front nose. All right, friends, the airframe of our FT Retro Rocket is now complete. It looks fantastic, and we even put the optional landing gear on. In the next video, we're going to be showing how to install the FT Aura 5 and also unlock all of its amazing capabilities to give you some really amazing features. And then after we install the FT Aura 5, we get to move on and let you guys choose which power system you're going to do, whether it's a prop-driven, EDF, or thrust vector. Thanks so much for building along with me, and we'll see you in the next video.